He stood at the head of the table, raising his glass to celebrate 25 years of marriage. 25 years. The room was warm with candlelight. Our children were smiling. His colleagues were seated around the table. Even the maid stood near the kitchen doorway, pretending not to watch him. He thanked everyone for coming. He thanked our children. He thanked his friends. And then he thanked the woman who has always stood by him. People assumed he meant me. He didn't look at me when he said it. That was the moment I knew. But what none of them knew was that I had already printed the messages, and I had planned this dinner myself. For 25 years, I believed I was married to a man who valued stability more than excitement. That is what drew me to him in the first place. He wasn't loud, he wasn't reckless, he wasn't the kind of man who flirted in public or chased attention. He built things, businesses, investments, a reputation, and eventually a family. We met when I was 23. He was already focused, already ambitious. I admired that about him. He had plans, clear ones, a house in a good neighborhood, 2 children, financial security, order. I wanted warmth. He wanted structure. Somewhere in the middle, we created a life. Our marriage was never dramatic. We didn't fight loudly. We didn't throw accusations across rooms. When we disagreed, we went quiet. We processed. We moved on. People described us as solid, and over time, I began to believe that solid meant safe. We built our home slowly. Every detail is chosen carefully. The dining table where we hosted birthdays, the living room where our children opened Christmas gifts, the bedroom that witnessed everything from whispered dreams to long stretches of silence. I handled the emotional architecture of our lives, school schedules, doctor appointments, holiday menus, the invisible labor that keeps a family breathing without anyone noticing the effort behind it. He handled the finances, investments, travel, expansion, deals. I trusted him, not blindly, but completely. When he began traveling more frequently for work, I adjusted. I packed his bags. I made sure his suits were pressed. I stayed up late when his flights were delayed. He would return with small gifts, perfume, chocolates, sometimes jewelry, always something that said, "I thought of you," and I believed him. The idea that he could betray me did not live in my imagination. It wasn't a fear I entertained. We hired the maid 2 years ago. I remember the day she came for the interview. She looked nervous, young, eager to please. I saw myself in her in some distant way, a woman trying to build something stable. He was the one who insisted we needed help. "You do too much," he told me. "At least let someone handle the cleaning." I resisted at first. I had always taken pride in maintaining our home, but he was persuasive. "You deserve to rest," he said. I didn't realize then that rest was not what he was offering me. At first, she was exactly what we needed: efficient, quiet, respectful. She kept her eyes down. She followed instructions. She addressed him formally. I showed her how I liked things arranged, where the extra linens were kept, which cabinets stuck slightly if you didn't push them firmly. She learned quickly. He began complimenting her work. "She's organized," he would say at dinner. "She pays attention to detail." I agreed. I didn't hear danger in those comments. Over time, small things shifted. He started staying in the kitchen longer in the evenings. He would check on something while she was finishing up. He became more particular about the days she came. "Let's make sure she's here Thursday," he once said casually. "Why Thursday?" I asked. "I have meetings all week. I just want the house to be clean before the weekend." Reasonable. Everything always sounded reasonable. That was the pattern. Nothing outrageous, nothing dramatic, just subtle adjustments that didn't seem worth questioning. He became protective of his phone. He angled it away when texting. He took calls outside more often. When I asked who it was, he would respond quickly. Work, clients, nothing important. The first time I felt something tighten in my chest, I dismissed it. After 25 years, suspicion feels like betrayal of your own loyalty. I told myself I was overthinking. I told myself long marriages go through phases. I told myself trust was stronger than insecurity. He still kissed me before leaving for work, still called me love in front of others, still introduced me proudly at events. Outwardly, nothing was broken, and that's what makes betrayal so dangerous. It hides inside normalcy. There were moments when I would enter a room and conversation would stop. He would clear his throat. She would lower her gaze. I noticed, but noticing and confronting are two different things. One evening, I asked him directly, "Are you happy?" He looked surprised. "Of course I am," he replied. "Why would you ask that?" I didn't have a solid answer, just a feeling, a faint misalignment, like a picture frame that isn't quite straight but not crooked enough to fix. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You worry too much," he said gently. That phrase lingered longer than it should have, because it wasn't reassuring. It was dismissal disguised as affection. I began watching more carefully after that, the way his eyes tracked her movement, the way she laughed at things that weren't funny. The silence fell heavier when I entered the room, but I still didn't accuse, not yet, because accusing changes everything, and part of me was still hoping I was wrong. 25 years teaches you how to tolerate discomfort. It teaches you how to smooth edges. It teaches you that storms pass. But this wasn't a storm. It was erosion. Slow, quiet, unnoticeable until something collapses. And I didn't know it then, but something had already begun collapsing. The first real shift didn't happen in a dramatic way. There was no lipstick on the collar, no late-night confession, no obvious mistakes. It began with patterns, subtle ones. He started coming home slightly later than usual, not late enough to question, just later than his own routine. His explanations were always smooth. Traffic was terrible. Client dinner ran long. I had to review contracts. All reasonable. But after 25 years, you don't just know a man's voice, you know its temperature. And he had changed. It was warmer when he spoke to her. I noticed it on an ordinary Tuesday. I was upstairs folding laundry when I heard them in the kitchen. She was finishing up. He had returned from work. Their conversation wasn't inappropriate. It was comfortable. That was what unsettled me. Comfort implies familiarity. He asked her about her family, about where she grew up, about her dreams. He had never asked the previous maid about her dreams. When I walked downstairs, the conversation paused, not abruptly, but gently, like a door closing instead of slamming. He smiled at me. "Everything looks great," he said, gesturing to the spotless counter. She avoided eye contact. I felt something tighten inside my chest. Not jealousy, awareness. A week later, I found myself noticing small adjustments in his behavior. He began dressing more carefully on days she worked, a different cologne, a sharper tie. One afternoon, I passed through the hallway and caught a glimpse of him in the mirror, adjusting his hair twice before stepping into the kitchen. He hadn't done that for me in years. Still, I said nothing. Marriage trains you to choose which hills are worth dying on. Then came the phone. It used to rest carelessly on the coffee table. Now it lived in his pocket, even at home. He started taking it into the bathroom. The first time I asked about it, I kept my voice light. "Are you guarding state secrets now?" He laughed. "Just work." Always work. The thing about betrayal is that it rarely announces itself with evidence. It presents an atmosphere. and the atmosphere in my home had shifted. One afternoon, I came home earlier than planned from a luncheon with friends. The house was quiet, too quiet for a day she was scheduled to work. Her shoes were near the entryway. His car was in the driveway, but the television wasn't on. No vacuum, no sound of dishes. I walked toward the kitchen slowly, not suspicious, just alert. I heard her voice first, low, relaxed. Then I heard him, and there was something in his tone I hadn't heard directed at me in a long time. Playfulness, softness. I paused before turning the corner. He said something I couldn't fully catch. Then she laughed, not politely, intimately. When I stepped into view, the energy shifted, not dramatically, but noticeably. He straightened up. She took a step back from the counter. "Back already?" he asked. His voice was steady, but his eyes were measuring mine. "Yes," I replied evenly. "Lunch ended early." She busied herself with wiping a perfectly clean surface. He asked how my day was. I answered. We stood there for a moment that stretched longer than it should have. Then he cleared his throat. "Well, I'll let you two finish up." He left the kitchen, and that was the first moment I felt something fracture. Not proof, not confirmation, but fracture. That evening, while he showered, his phone lit up on the dresser. It was face down. It vibrated once, then again. I didn't touch it. I stared at it. I had never needed to check his phone before. Trust had never required surveillance. But something inside me had shifted from faith to verification. When he stepped out of the bathroom, he saw me standing near the dresser. He moved quickly, almost too quickly, and picked up the phone. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yes," I said, and I meant it, because at that moment I wasn't angry. I was observing, and observation is far more dangerous than accusation. Over the next week, I watched more carefully. He began complimenting her appearance, subtle remarks. "You look different today. That color suits you." She blushed. He noticed. I noticed him noticing. One evening, I found him in the kitchen again after she had technically finished her shift. It was nearly 7. "She needed extra instructions," he explained before I asked. I nodded. But something in my posture must have changed, because for the first time in 25 years, he avoided my eyes. That was the red flag. Not the laughter, not the phone, not the compliments, the avoidance. Men avoid when they feel watched, and for the first time, he felt watched. I didn't confront him that night, or the next, because a confrontation without certainty can be turned against you. And I needed certainty, not suspicion, not insecurity. Certainty. So instead of reacting emotionally, I began paying attention strategically. And what I discovered next was no longer the atmosphere. It was evidence. Certainty does not arrive loudly. It arrives quietly with something you cannot unsee. 3 days after I decided to stop doubting my instincts, opportunity presented itself. He left for work in a rush. That alone was unusual. He is a man of routine. He checks his briefcase twice. He aligns his watch with the clock in the hallway. He reviews his calendar before stepping out the door. That morning, he skipped the second glance at the hallway mirror. He kissed my cheek distractedly. "I might be late," he said. Then he left. 10 minutes later, I heard the sound of his car returning to the driveway. I assumed he had forgotten something. Instead, I heard his footsteps rush back inside. He walked straight past me in the living room and toward the bedroom. A moment later, he emerged with his phone in hand. "I forgot this," he said, holding it up slightly. Of course, he had never forgotten his phone before. He left again, and I sat there in silence, not hurt, not angry, aware. That afternoon, while she was cleaning the upstairs hallway, I made a decision. Not emotional, strategic. I walked into our bedroom and opened the drawer where he keeps old documents. Beneath bank statements and insurance papers, there is a small locked box. He once told me it held important backup documents. I had never had a reason to question that, until now. The key to that box hangs on his key ring, but there is also a spare in the garage. He thinks I don't know that. I did not rush. I walked to the garage calmly, retrieved the spare. I returned to the bedroom. I opened the box. Inside were passports, emergency cash, and copies of legal documents. And something else, a second phone. My hand did not tremble. That surprised me. I turned it on. No password. That was his mistake. The screen lit up with messages, not dozens, hundreds. Her name was saved without a last name, just a single initial. I opened the thread. The first message I saw was from 2 nights earlier. I can't wait until she's asleep. My chest tightened, but my face remained still. I scrolled. There were plans, descriptions, inside jokes, compliments he had not given me in years. And then I saw something that shifted this from betrayal to humiliation. Photos, taken in my kitchen, on my patio, in my home. Her hand resting on the counter where I prepare family meals. Him standing too close behind her, comfortable, familiar, intimate. There is a specific kind of pain that does not scream. It freezes. That is what happened to me. Not because I was shocked he could cheat, but because he had done it inside the walls I built. I continued reading. There were messages about timing. She's out Thursday afternoon. I'll make sure you leave before 5. She suspects nothing. That last one lingered. He had underestimated me. I took photos of the messages with my own phone, every page, every image, every detail. Then I powered the phone off and placed it back exactly as I found it, closed the box, returned the key. I walked downstairs. She was vacuuming the living room. Her movements were steady. She did not know. That gave me power. "Can you finish early today?" I asked calmly. She looked up. "Yes, ma'am." "Good. We have dinner coming up. I'll need everything spotless." She nodded, and for a brief second our eyes met. There was something there, not guilt, confidence. That was when I understood something deeper. This was not a mistake. It was a pattern. That evening when he came home, I watched him differently. He kissed me as usual, asked about my day, mentioned an upcoming business dinner. I smiled. "I was thinking," I said gently, "we should host something soon." He paused. "What kind of something?" "Our anniversary is next week." His shoulders relaxed. "Of course, 25 years, that's worth celebrating." "Yes," I said, "it is." He did not know that I had already seen everything. He did not know I had evidence. He did not know the shift had already occurred. That is the advantage of silent discovery. The guilty assume you are still blind. Over the next few days, I acted normally. I made dinner. I asked about work. I discussed guest lists. He even suggested inviting close friends. "Make it special," he said. "I want people to see how strong we are." The irony did not escape me. I nodded. "I'll handle everything." And I did. Catering, decor, guest confirmations, even seating arrangements, including one particular seat near the back of the room, reserved quietly for her. He thought the anniversary dinner would celebrate our endurance. He had no idea it would reveal his collapse. By the time the invitations were sent, my plan was already complete. I had the messages printed, screenshots organized, financial accounts reviewed, and something else, something he would never anticipate. Because betrayal may start with secrecy, but exposure belongs to the patient, and I had been patient, very patient. Not forgiveness, not denial, composure, the kind that makes people underestimate you. I chose a venue he loved, a private dining hall at the hotel where we celebrated our 10th anniversary. He is always sentimental about milestones. He believes in symbols, in optics. So I used that. I booked the largest private room. Crystal chandeliers, soft lighting, long rectangular table instead of round, so everyone would face each other, so no one could hide. He noticed the effort immediately. "You didn't have to go this far," he said one evening while reviewing the guests list. I smiled. 25 years deserve something memorable. He seemed pleased, proud, almost relieved. That relief told me something. He believed I knew nothing, or worse, he believed even if I suspected, I would protect him. That was the real betrayal. Over the next week, I orchestrated everything carefully. I selected the menu myself, his favorite wine, the same dessert we served at our wedding. Details matter in public settings. They create emotional contrast. I invited close friends, business associates, our adult children, a few extended family members, people whose opinions he values carefully. Reputation was always important to him. That would be relevant later. 2 days before the dinner, I did something deliberate. I told him I needed help at the house while I finalized arrangements. "I'll have her come in longer hours this week," he offered quickly. Of course he would. I nodded. "That's fine." That afternoon, I approached her calmly in the kitchen. "I'll need you to assist at the anniversary dinner," I said. She froze slightly. "Assist?" "Yes, just help coordinate with the staff. It will be easier if someone familiar is there." Her eyes flickered. To the hallway, toward where he stood. He stepped in smoothly. "That's a good idea." Too quickly. I watched their exchange. It lasted less than 2 seconds, but it confirmed something. They were comfortable together in ways that exceeded secrecy. She agreed, softly. "Yes, ma'am." That ma'am felt theatrical, but I didn't correct her. Instead, I leaned into the role they believed I occupied, the trusting wife, the oblivious hostess. That night, I finalized my preparations. I printed the messages on high-quality paper, not crumpled screenshots, not impulsive evidence, organized documentation. I placed them in a slim leather folder, neat, composed. I also scheduled something else, a brief moment in the evening when the lights would dim for a toast. He had planned to give a speech. He mentioned it casually while adjusting his tie in the mirror. "I want to say something meaningful," he said. "I want people to see how strong our marriage is." I watched his reflection. "Of course," I replied evenly. "You should." He practiced lines under his breath. Gratitude, commitment, loyalty. The irony was almost impressive. The morning of the anniversary, he brought me flowers, white roses, my favorite. 25 years, he said softly, for everything you've done. I accepted them. "Thank you." He kissed my forehead, and for a brief moment I saw something else. Not guilt, confidence. He believed he had balanced both worlds successfully. He believed he could compartmentalize betrayal and celebration. That was his final miscalculation. That afternoon, I dressed carefully, not dramatically, elegantly, the kind of presence that commands a room without demanding it. I wore the necklace he gave me on our 20th anniversary. He noticed. "That looks beautiful on you," he said. "I know," I replied gently. When we arrived at the hotel, guests were already gathering. Laughter filled the room. Wine glasses clinked. People approached us with congratulations. 25 years. That's rare these days. He smiled proudly, placed his hand at the small of my back. The gesture was possessive, performative. Our children hugged us. Friends complimented the setup. Everything appeared perfect. And then she arrived, dressed more carefully than usual, subtle makeup, a fitted dress that was slightly too formal for staff. I noticed the way he noticed, but I said nothing. I simply directed her to assist with coordinating plates. She moved through the room carefully, avoiding prolonged eye contact, but she was present. That was enough. As dinner progressed, the atmosphere grew warmer. Stories were shared, old memories revisited. He relaxed. He laughed loudly. He poured wine generously. I waited. Timing is everything in public exposure. You do not interrupt joy too early. You allow it to crest. Then you shift it. Midway through dessert, he stood up, tapped his glass gently. The room quieted. "I'd like to say a few words," he began, and as he started speaking about commitment, about loyalty, about standing by each other through everything, I reached calmly for the leather folder beside my plate. The lights dimmed slightly, just as I had arranged. He had no idea that the stage he believed he controlled was no longer his. He lifted his glass. "To my wife," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. 25 years of loyalty, of patience, of standing by me through every challenge. The room softened. People smiled. Our daughter wiped her eyes. He continued. "She has been the foundation of this family, an example of commitment." I watched him carefully. His confidence had returned. He believed he was safe. He believed he had balanced deception and celebration flawlessly. "And through everything," he said, placing his hand over his chest, "we have always chosen honesty." That word, honesty, it echoed in the quiet room. And that was when I stood. Not abruptly, not dramatically, simply stood. The chair slid back against the floor softly. The sound was enough. He paused mid-sentence. His eyes shifted toward me. I held his gaze for a moment. Then I smiled. "Thank you," I said calmly. My voice carried easily across the table. "I'd also like to say a few words." There was polite laughter. Of course she would speak. 25 years deserved balance. He nodded, stepping slightly aside. "Of course," he said. I picked up my glass, but I did not raise it. Instead, I placed the leather folder gently on the table. I looked around the room, at our children, at his colleagues, at our friends who had witnessed our life for decades. "I've always believed," I began slowly, "that marriage survives on truth." The room quieted further. He smiled faintly, thinking I was echoing his theme. "But sometimes," I continued, "truth needs assistance." His smile faltered slightly. I opened the folder, not hurriedly, not aggressively. I removed the first printed page, and I read, "I can't wait until she's asleep." The words landed heavier in silence than they would have in shouting. His face was drained of color. A few guests shifted in their seats. He opened his mouth. "Wait." I raised my hand slightly, not to silence him angrily, just to pause him. "You look beautiful today," I read again. "Thursday afternoon works. She'll be out." A murmur moved around the table. Confusion, discomfort, recognition. Our daughter's smile disappeared. Our son leaned forward. "What is this?" he asked quietly. I turned to another page. "These," I said evenly, "are messages between my husband and the woman who has been cleaning our home." The room inhaled collectively. I did not look at him. I looked at her. She stood frozen near the back of the room, tray in hand. Her face was pale. He finally found his voice. "This isn't the time." "You're right, it isn't." I walked around the table slowly, each step deliberate. I handed a copy of the printed messages to our daughter, then to our son, then placed one in front of his closest business partner. No raised voice, no tears, just documentation. "You thanked me for your loyalty," I continued. "I thought tonight would be the right time to clarify what loyalty looks like." His breathing had changed, quick, shallow. "Let's talk about this privately," he whispered harshly. I leaned slightly closer to him. "We've been talking privately for 2 years," I replied quiet enough that only he could hear. Then I stepped back, addressing the room again. "I discovered this affair 3 weeks ago," I said calmly. "I waited, I gathered evidence, I reviewed our finances." That sentence shifted the room further. Finances. Now his business partner's posture has changed. "I've already filed for divorce. I've secured the house in my name. The accounts have been frozen pending division." He stared at me as if seeing a stranger. "You... what?" he stammered. I held his gaze for the first time since standing. "You underestimated my patience," I said quietly. A chair scraped across the floor. Our daughter stood. "Is this true?" she asked him. He did not answer immediately. That silence confirmed everything. The room no longer belonged to him. The story no longer belonged to him. Reputation, the thing he guarded most carefully, was dissolving in real time, and I had not raised my voice once. I turned toward the maid. "You will not be returning to my home," I said calmly. "You've already received your final payment." Her lips trembled. She placed the tray down and walked out without a word. He reached for my arm. I stepped back. "Don't," I said softly. The power dynamic had completely shifted. Guests avoided eye contact. Some whispered, some stared openly. His colleague shook his head slowly. "You should have told me," our son muttered. Not to me, to him. That was the final fracture. He had lost control of the room, of the narrative, of the illusion. I picked up my glass again, and this time I raised it. "To the truth," I said simply. Then I sat down and let the silence finish what I had started. Silence is louder than screaming. After I sat down, the room did not immediately explode into chaos. It fractured quietly. You could hear the faint hum of the chandelier above us, the clink of a fork being set down too carefully, someone clearing their throat without knowing why. He remained standing, still holding his glass, but his hand was trembling now. That was the first visible crack. He tried to recover. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, forcing a strained laugh. "It's not what it looks like." But the paper in our daughter's hands said otherwise. She wasn't looking at him anymore. She was reading every line, every message. Her jaw tightened. Our son looked at the paper to his father. "How long?" he asked. That question did more damage than anything I had read aloud. because it demanded a timeline, it demanded intent, it demanded repetition. He didn't answer. Instead, he looked at me as if I might rescue him from his own exposure. For 25 years, I had done exactly that. Smoothed over awkward moments, explained his temper, protected his image. Tonight, I remained still. His business partner leaned back in his chair slowly. "That's unfortunate," he said under his breath. Unfortunate, a word men use when scandal threatens proximity. I watched my husband process what was happening. He wasn't thinking about me. He wasn't thinking about betrayal. He was calculating damage. Who had read the messages? Who might talk? Who might withdraw business? Reputation collapsing in real time. He set his glass down carefully, too carefully. Then he leaned toward me. "You've humiliated me," he whispered. I looked at him steadily. "No," I replied quietly. "You humiliated yourself." His face shifted. Not anger, fear. Because for the first time he understood something. I was no longer the quiet stabilizer of his world. I was the architect of its exposure. Across the table, our daughter stood up fully. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shouting. She simply stepped away from him. That physical distance was more powerful than rage. Our son followed. "I can't believe you did this to Mom," he said. There it was. Not to us, to Mom. The shift of loyalty. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but the messages had already done the work. There is no argument against documentation. Guests began murmuring openly now. Some avoided looking at him. Some looked directly at him with a kind of disappointed curiosity. He had always been admired in this room. Tonight, admiration had turned into scrutiny, and scrutiny is brutal for a man built on image. The staff moved awkwardly along the edges of the room, unsure whether to continue clearing plates. No one wanted to be the first to speak normally again. He pulled at his collar slightly, a habit he has when he feels cornered. "You could have handled this privately," he said, louder now. The words carried to the end of the table. I folded my hands calmly. "You handled it privately for 2 years," I said. "That seemed to suit you." That ended the argument, because truth has weight, and weight silences defensiveness. He looked smaller somehow, not physically, but structurally, like the scaffolding of his authority had been removed. I noticed something else, the absence of the maid. Her seat at the back was empty. Her departure had been quiet, but symbolic. He glanced toward the doorway once, just once, and in that glance I saw it. Regret, not for hurting me, for losing convenience, for losing control, for losing the illusion that he could manage both worlds indefinitely. Our daughter placed the printed pages down slowly. "I need air," she said, and walked toward the balcony doors. Guests began standing. Conversations fractured into small, tense clusters. Some people approached me quietly. "Are you all right?" "Yes," I answered, and I meant it, because what I felt was not devastation, it was clear. He leaned down toward me again. "What do you want?" he asked. The question surprised him as much as it surprised me. For 25 years, he assumed he knew what I wanted. Tonight, he realized he did not. "I want peace," I said simply, "and I've already arranged it." His breathing grew uneven. "What does that mean?" "It means the lawyer will contact you tomorrow. It means the house remains with me. It means our accounts are frozen. It means you'll have to explain this without me beside you." He stared at me, not with anger, but with dawning comprehension. The collapse was not just social, it was structural, financial, legal, reputational. The foundation he believed unshakable had already been moved. Guests began leaving quietly. No dramatic exits, just discomfort, whispers, side glances. His business partner avoided his eye entirely. That would matter later. He stood there long after most people had drifted toward the exit. A man who built his life on image, now stripped of it. And for the first time since I discovered the messages, I felt something rise in my chest. Not sadness, not fury. Relief. The pretending was over. The silence was no longer mine to carry. And as he looked at me, truly looked at me, I could see it. He expected tears, screaming, pleading. Instead, he received a strategy, and strategy frightens men who depend on control. When the last guest left, the room felt hollow. The celebration decorations now looked ironic. Silver ribbons, white roses. 25 years. He finally sat down heavily in his chair, and for the first time that night, he looked small, very small. "You didn't have to destroy everything," he said quietly. I stood. "I didn't," I replied. "You did." And I walked out of the room without looking back. The night air felt different when I stepped outside. Cooler, quieter, honest. Inside that restaurant, reputations were unraveling. Outside, the world continued as if nothing had happened. Cars passed, streetlights glowed. Somewhere down the block, someone laughed. It reminded me of something important. Scandal feels enormous to the people inside it, but the world does not stop. I stood there for a moment, breathing steadily, not shaking, not crying, just steady. My phone vibrated in my hand. It was my lawyer. I had scheduled the call for that exact time. "I assume it's done," she said calmly when I answered. "Yes," I replied. "Good. Then tomorrow we proceed." There was no drama in her voice, only sequence. That was intentional. I did not want emotion guiding the next steps. I wanted structure. Earlier that week, I had already secured copies of everything: property deeds, investment accounts, retirement funds, business holdings connected to our marriage. I had photographed documents, forwarded records, archived emails. He believed the anniversary dinner was a celebration. For me, it was a deadline. The following morning, I did not wake up in panic. I woke up organized. The house felt quieter than usual. He had not come home. I assumed he was managing fallout somewhere else. Damage control meetings, phone calls, explanations wrapped in half-truth. But there was one thing he could not control: documentation. At 9 in the morning, my lawyer filed the petition. At 10:30, financial holds were placed on shared accounts. At 11, a formal notice was delivered to his office. Not to our home, his office. Location matters. Witnesses matter. Visibility matters. By noon, he was calling, repeatedly. I let it ring, not to be cruel, but because urgency shifts when it is not immediately answered. He left messages. Call me. We need to talk. You're overreacting. Then the tone changed. Please. By mid-afternoon, he arrived at the house. I was seated in the living room, calm, prepared. He walked in without knocking. For the first time in years, he looked uncertain inside his own home. "What have you done?" he asked. His voice was no longer controlled. It was strained. "I protected myself," I replied. "You froze everything." "Yes." "You filed." "Yes." His shoulders dropped slightly. "You didn't even talk to me." I held his gaze. "You've been talking to someone else for 2 years." That ended that argument. He paced the room, ran his hands through his hair. "This will destroy my business," he said. There it was. Not, "This will hurt our children." Not, "This will hurt you." My business. "I considered that," I said calmly, "and I proceeded anyway." That sentence landed heavily because it told him something new. His professional power no longer intimidated me. He stopped pacing. "What do you want?" he asked again. Clarity, ownership, freedom. But I simplified it. The house, the primary account, and a clean division of everything else. He stared at me. "That's unreasonable." "It's strategic," I replied. He laughed once, short, almost disbelieving. "Since when are you strategic?" I allowed myself a small smile. "Since I realized you underestimated me." Silence. He looked around the room, at the furniture, at the photos on the wall, at the life he assumed would always remain available to him. "You're really going through with this," he said quietly. "Yes." The word did not tremble. He shifted tactics, softened his voice. "This is humiliating." "Yes," I said again. He swallowed. "People are talking." "They were talking before," I replied. "You just didn't know." That unsettled him, because exposure does not begin the night of revelation. It begins the moment someone chooses not to tolerate deception. "He can fix this," he said finally. "No," I answered gently. "You can't." That was the moment the final illusion broke. He realized this was not negotiation, it was an execution. He left an hour later, not slamming doors, not shouting, just quieter than I had ever seen him. And in that quiet, I understood something powerful. Public humiliation is loud, but the strategic aftermath is silent, precise, measured, irreversible. The next few days unfolded exactly as predicted. His business partner requested a meeting. Our children called me separately, not to question me, to ask what they could do. The narrative had shifted. He was explaining. I was moving forward. By the end of the week, the house was legally secured under my name. The divorce proceedings were official, financial negotiations were structured, and the illusion of control he had carried for decades was gone, not destroyed by rage, removed by preparation. That is the difference between reaction and strategy. And as I sat at the dining table one evening, the same table where he had toasted to loyalty, I realized something. The exposure was never the climax. The preparation was. The dinner was a stage, but the real power came from the quiet work done beforehand, and he never saw it coming. Power does not return loudly. It settles. It stabilizes. It restructures the air in a room. By the second week after the anniversary dinner, the tone of everything had changed. His calls became less frequent, not because he had accepted it, but because he had run out of leverage.
The temporary account freezes had become structured separation. Our attorney drafted the formal asset division proposal. I did not argue over decorative things. I did not argue over cars. I did not argue over status items. I focused on foundation, the house, the long-term investments, the business percentage legally tied to marital equity. That last part surprised him most. "You're not entitled to that," he said during one of our mediated meetings. The mediator did not respond. She simply looked at the documentation. I did not raise my voice. "I am legally entitled to what we built during the marriage," I said calmly. He leaned back in his chair. For the first time, he looked tired, not theatrically tired, actually tired, because the narrative he had built for himself was collapsing. In his version of events, I was emotional, impulsive, reckless. Instead, I was precise. He expected drama. He received documentation, and documentation is harder to fight. By the end of the third week, the business implications had begun surfacing. His business partner reduced his public visibility. Certain clients paused contracts, not because of morality, because instability scares investors. He had built his professional image on discipline and leadership.
Now there were whispers, not loud, but enough. And the whispers did not include my name. They included him. That was the reversal. For years, I carried the quiet weight of maintaining appearances. Now he carried the weight of explanation. We met one final time in person to sign preliminary agreements. He looked different, not broken, but recalibrated. He no longer tried to intimidate. He no longer tried to charm. He simply wanted resolution. "You've changed," he said quietly as he signed. "No," I replied. "I've clarified." He looked at me carefully, as if trying to determine when the shift had happened. The truth? It happened the moment I stopped protecting him from consequences. The house transfer was finalized 2 weeks later. His name was removed, mine alone on the deed. When I held the updated document in my hand, I did not feel triumphant. I felt steady. Ownership is quiet when it's earned. The financial division concluded shortly after. He resisted, he negotiated, but ultimately the legal structure was clear. Marriage is partnership, even when loyalty is not. The maid? She did not reappear. I heard through mutual contacts that she had left the city. Affairs collapse quickly when convenience disappears. He moved into a smaller condominium across town, temporary at first, then permanent. His social invitations decreased, not dramatically, just gradually. The image takes time to rebuild, and sometimes it doesn't. Our children adjusted in their own ways. They visited me more often, not out of pity, out of respect. Respect changes posture. They no longer saw me as passive. They saw me as deliberate. One evening, months later, he asked to meet for coffee, not to reconcile, to talk. We sat across from each other quietly, no hostility, no warmth, just recognition. "You underestimated me," he said finally. "Yes," I replied. No anger, no satisfaction, just agreement. He nodded slowly. "I didn't think you would move like that." Move like that, strategically, legally, publicly. That sentence told me everything about how he had viewed me for years, as steady, supportive, predictable, but never powerful. And that miscalculation cost him everything. "I didn't think I would either," I said honestly, because sometimes power is discovered under pressure. We parted without promises, without bitterness, just distance, permanent distance. The psychological reversal was complete. He no longer occupied my emotional center. He no longer shaped my financial reality. He no longer controlled the narrative of my life. Power had shifted, not because I humiliated him, but because I stopped accepting humiliation. There is a difference. The anniversary dinner was the spark. The legal structure was the lock. And once power locks into place, it rarely returns to its previous holder. I walked through my home that evening slowly, touching the walls, the banister, the kitchen counter where I had once stood pretending not to notice small things. The house felt different now, not because it changed, but because I did. And permanence is not loud. It is the absence of fear. It is the absence of dependence. It is the quiet knowledge that if betrayal ever approaches again, it will not find you unprepared. The reversal was complete. Not dramatic, not chaotic, permanent. People think the hardest part of betrayal is the discovery. It isn't. It's the moment you decide what you will tolerate next. The affair hurt, yes. The humiliation was public, yes. But the real shift happened long before the anniversary dinner. It happened the morning I copied financial records quietly. It happened the moment I realized loyalty without respect is just slow erosion. I walk through my home now without scanning for signs, without wondering who is texting, without shrinking my voice to maintain peace. Peace that depends on silence is not peace. It is compliance. The house is quiet in a different way now, not tense, not performative, just mine. I kept the dining table, the same one where he toasted to honesty. Sometimes I sit there with a cup of tea and think about how close I came to doing nothing, how easy it would have been to protect his image again, to confront him privately, to cry, to negotiate secrecy, to preserve comfort. But comfort is expensive when it costs your dignity. People ask me now, quietly, how I stayed so calm, how I didn't scream, how I didn't throw something. The answer is simple. Emotion gives temporary relief. Preparation gives permanent power. When I exposed him, it wasn't anger speaking. It was completed. The work was already done. The documents were already secured. The exit was already built. All I did that night was remove the curtain. He lost reputation. He lost leverage. He lost the illusion that I would always absorb the damage. But I gained something far more important: clarity, independence, and a version of myself he never bothered to see. Sometimes I think about that moment when he asked, "Since when are you strategic?" Since the moment I realized I had to be. That is what betrayal does when it meets intelligence. It creates recalibration. I do not hate him. Hate ties you to the past. I do not wish him ruin. Consequences already did their work. What I feel is something quieter, detachment. And detachment is freedom. If you are listening to this and you recognize yourself in the silence, if you have been minimizing small signs, if you have been protecting someone who would not protect you, understand this: exposure without preparation is chaos. Preparation without exposure is fear. But when you combine both carefully, you do not explode, you execute, and execution changes everything. You do not need to scream to be powerful. You do not need to beg to be heard. And you do not need to compete with deception. You simply need to decide when enough is enough. The anniversary dinner ended. The marriage ended. But I did not end. I recalibrated. And that is the difference between being humiliated and choosing when the humiliation stops. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in strength without noise, in power without performance, then stay here. Like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to understand that dignity is not passive, it is strategic, and sometimes the calmest person in the room is the one who has already won.